This is Duke University.
It's a pleasure and an honor to be speaking with you today, Ms. Kadeer. I'd want to start off by asking you, how did you come to be leader of the World Uyghur Congress, and what does that position entail for you?
Allah bilan kelganingizni aytib qarshi olaman. Hargisi dunyo Uyg'ur qultining raisi bo'libsiz, Uyg'urlarning. Hamda bu deganlik hamda siz nimaga vakillik qilsiz degan gap dedi.
Dünya Uyghur Kurdining raisi bo'lishim Uyg'urlarningki shu vakillik organi bo'lg'achqa men Dünya Uyghur Kurdining raisligini oldim. Men agar uning rais bo'lsam, bo'lmasam, Uyg'urlarning bir ovozi bo'lish, bir Uyg'urlar hozirgi mushu davrda o'zi bir liderga ham bir ovozga, bir yetakchiga muhtoj bo'lganligi uchun shu vakillik o'rnini tutib turaman deb men shunga.
Yes, as the president of the World Uyghur Congress, obviously the organization that represents the collective interests of the Uyghur people in the world. I am the representative of the Uyghur people in East Turkestan. I'm their voice, and I also represent their political demands from the Chinese government.
Endi Dünya Uyghur Kurdi degan tashkilot butun dunyoda vatanning ichida, vatanning erkinligi, xalqning erkinligi, vatanimizning erkinligi uchun kurash qilgan ziyolilarning turmida yetib, o'zi ashada erkin o'zining ovozini chiqarmay, qechib chiqqanlarningki turmida yotgan, zarba yegan, ashad faoliyat olib borgan o'zining xalqining haq-huquq uchun kurash qilganlarning to'plashgan o'rni.
And in addition to that, the World Uyghur Congress consists of officials, Uyghurs, who fled Chinese persecution. Some of them were even jailed for political reasons by the Chinese government. So all of them, they in their own ways also represent our people. So this organization is very unique for the Uyghurs, and it represents our people in the West.
Dünyanın hem yerideki Dünya Uyghur Kurdining vakilleri ve onun işlevatkan içindeki adamları, rehberleri hemisi Uygurlarning içinde vakil karakterlik adamlar bo'lg'achqa, şular hemimiz toplaşıp meni andikin bula sayladı, men saylan bilan o'tirib chiqdim.
And so all our officials from the World Uyghur Congress, they are representative of the Uyghurs, and in the election when they voted for me, I was elected as a president, so I was very privileged for that.
Now, do you desire total independence of East Turkestan, greater autonomy for the region but to still be a part of China, or simply greater rights and respect for the Uyghur people within the Chinese system? And as a follow-up, regardless of which option is preferable to you, which one do you think has the best chance of succeeding?
Bu hamda siz yoki sizlar bu Sharqiy Turkistonning mustaqilligini talab qilyapsizlar yoki Xitoy ichidagi oliy avtonomiyani talab qilyapsizlar yoki madaniyat, til, huquqlaringlarni talab qilyapsizlar. Uningdan sirt qaysiga erishish sizlar uchun mumkinchiligi cho'ngroq.
Xitoy hukumati bizga avtonom huquqni 60 yildan beri allaqachon berdi. Shu bergan avtonom degan huquq bilan bizning tilimizni, madaniyatimizni, erkinligimizni, bizning insoniyligimizning hammini yo'qotdi.
In fact, the Chinese government granted the Uyghur people the so-called autonomy in 1955. It was supposed to respect our rights, language, culture, traditions, and our basic rights. But those policies have never been implemented. Instead, the Chinese government used the autonomy framework as a measure to persecute the Uyghur people and deny the Uyghur people the very rights guaranteed on the autonomy law.
Endi özünün avtonom huquqının bizga bergan, va'da qilgan huquqining aksinchasiga ish qildi.
So the government, in fact, did the exact opposite of what is on the paper regarding autonomy law.
Bulupmi yaqinqi vaqtdan beri Uyg'ur xalqini burun sistemalik assimilyatsiya qilgan bo'lsa, endi mush yaqinqi bulupmi shu dunyo harakatlarininki mush yaqinqi 7-ayning 2-ayning 5-97-yildan keyingi bara Xitoy hukumati iqtisodiy jihatdan yuksalganiga qarab Uyg'ur xalqini hayot mamatlik kurash ichiga tashlab qo'ydi. Faqat qirib tugutish siyosatini ilgari surdi. Shu o'zi avtonom huquqni ishlatib turib qildi ashini.
And also the Chinese government used the autonomy framework to implement a number of high-intense cultural genocide policies against the Uyghur people. And after the recent unrest in the region, the Chinese government also basically see Uyghurs as the enemy, as a problem there. So eventual goal is probably just to get rid of the Uyghur people. So the Chinese government policies are not helping to stabilize the situation on the ground.
Burun endi Uyghur halkı abdunum hukuk basımı yoki öz eng oliy bir o'ziga huquqiga erisha oladigan bir huquq bo'lsa-mu, mayli o'zimizning taqdirimizni o'zimiz belgilasak deb o'ylagan bo'lsa, hozir birmi Uyg'ur undaq o'ylamaydi.
And probably in the past, many Uyghurs were still hopeful that the Chinese government would eventually grant them some kind of higher autonomy. And they believed the government was in general not that bad. But after the unrest of July 5th of 2009, the hopes of the Uyghur people were dashed because of the Chinese massacre of the Uyghur protesters. So today, we believe the majority of Uyghurs probably don't want to be part of China anymore because of the situation.
Onun üstüge Tibet meselesi de Holnus Dalaylama en ali abdunum alınman dedi. En ahırda abdunumның özünü bəsən alay dedi. Xitay hökuməti bir xil halda 60 yıldan beri Holnus Dalaylamanı ve Tibetni aldap koydu.
And furthermore, His Holiness the Dalai Lama sought the higher autonomy, genuine autonomy from China by promoting and proposing the middle way approach. But for the past 2 decades, since his proposal, the Chinese government basically deceived His Holiness and his government in exile. And although they had a number of negotiations regarding the status of Tibet, the Chinese government offered the Tibetans absolutely nothing. So that, unfortunately, is not a good model for us to pursue.
Şuna biz hazır aldı bilen Xitay hökuməti öz bir demokratiyaga yüzünüp, muşu xalqның hammasiga demokratiya beriş tüzümünü özgergenden keyin biz aşı özümüzge köçüp kelgen köçmen her xil milletler bilen inaq yaşaya alaydigan hem şula bilen kan tökmegen alda tinchlik bilen hal qila alaydigan bir real yolunu tanlap şu vaqtidagi söhbət temisida biz özümüz real bir narsani o'tirib chiqamiz.
And I believe the real solution to the political question will come when China becomes a democracy, when China allows genuine debates on the question of the East Turkestan. And our hope is then to find a realistic and solution to the problem, also with the wishes of the Uyghurs and others who lived in the region.
Şu vaqtda biz özümüzün taqdirimizni özümüz belgilaydigan, hem İçimizdeki her xil milletler bilen hem Xitay bilen kelişe alaydigan bir holatda bir meseleni o'tirg'a chiqib kelishim bilen bir taraf qilamiz. Biz hozir abdunum degan gapni qilmaymiz, mustaqil degan gapni qilmaymiz, chunki bir tinchlik bilan bu ish hal bo'lamdi bo'lmamdi biz uqmaymiz, chunki Tibet meselesi oldimizda turibdi.
So we're not in a position to seek either independence now or autonomy, because it doesn't matter what our position is now at the moment, because we saw what's happening with the Tibetans, and that's not a good precedent. But our hope is, again, when China becomes a democracy, then we're hoping for a peaceful, negotiated settlement to the interest of all sides.
Lekin o zemin aş Uyghur halkı tarixten özünüz bilisiz devlet kurgan, Tibet'nin zemini, Tibet halkının zemini, Şarkı Türkistan Uyghur halkının zemini.
But it's a fact, just like Tibet belonged to the Tibetans throughout history. East Turkestan belonged to the Uyghurs and other indigenous populations, regardless what the Chinese government's claim to the land.
The Chinese government has characterized you as an ironclad separatist colluding with terrorists and Islamic extremists. What is behind this accusation?
Xitay hökuməti siz degəni terroristlər bilan radikallar bilan birləşdirən bir bölgünçü, dömödək bir bölgünçü deb ayıplaydı deyil. Siz onun qanday qaraysiz? Nimdə bunlar deyil?
Endi men oldu bilen mening bütün dünyadaki zoravallıkka karşı bir ayal ekenligimni bilgenlik üçün xapıp ketip başladıyım.
China is not happy because I'm against any form of dictatorship, especially the Chinese dictatorship.
Hem zoravallıkka, meyli üzemnin milleti olsun, meyli Xitay halkı olsun, meyli Müslüman başka millet olsun, dünyada ip barıldığın terrorizm, zoravallık hareketiga mening karşı ekenligim texim onu xapı kılıdı.
And also the Chinese government knows that I'm against both violence and terrorism, whether used against the Uyghurs, Chinese, or any other people in the world. So the Chinese government tried to twist the truth. my character.
Şunun üçün endi men faqat Xitoy hukumatidan tinchlik bilan bu masalani tinchlik bilan hal qilaman degashga dunyo meni qo'llagandan dunyoga meni ashundaq ko'z tush uchun ashtaq deydi.
And also because I have been championing peace and a peaceful resolution of the question of East Turkestan, so the Chinese government is not happy with the support I get in the West, in the international community. So that's why it tries to demonize me in front of their people and the international community.
Mesela Holness Dalai Lama'nın aynı vaxtda terörist mi degen, bölgünçü mü degen.
And the Chinese government did the same thing with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, calling him in the past as a separatist and a terrorist. So that's the way the Chinese government is.
Endi şunun üçün ashtaq deydi, endi men özü davatqan gapdike, özümü işlenmeydi, lekin ashtaq deydi.
That's what the Chinese government labels people like me and His Holiness, but most Chinese people don't even buy that.
Endi bizning ağzımızda biz vatanimizdan içinde özümüzün ahvalimizni hökumet kimi anlatamadık. Bizde o erkinlik yok. Biz dünyaya çıkıp erkinlikke çıkkandan keyin biz özümüzün halkımızın hakkını dünyaya etkanlığımız için bizning faqat ağzımızda boğuş üçün ijod qilgan gap bu.
And the Chinese government gave us no freedom of speech, so we were not able to speak on any sensitive issue in our homeland. But the reason the Chinese government accused me of this alleged labels, claims, is because the government wants to silence me in front of the international community so that nobody will listen to what I have to say about Chinese persecution of the Uyghur people.
Is the Chinese government afraid of you?
Xitoy hukumati sizdan qo'rqamdi.
Haqiqatdan qo'rqdi deydi.
Chinese government is afraid of truth.
Men rost gapni deyman.
I speak the truth.
Xitoylar bilan yaxshi munosabatni qilib, mush Xitoy hukumatiningki bizning xalqimizga haqni berishni talab qilaman. Shuning uchun ashundan qo'rqdi. Xitoy hukumati mening xalqimning og'zini 60 yil bo'g'ib, Dalai Lama qochib chiqdi, mening xalqimni mushunda qo'rchab, pasportni bermay, sirtqi ovozini oltanmas qilayotgan. Men hozir qochib chiqib degandan shuning uchun Xitoy hukumati meningdan qo'rqishdagi sabab shu. Bo'lmasa 7-oyning 5-idagi voqeani butun Rebiya Kadeer qo'zg'adi deb o'tirg'i chiqmaydi deydi.
Yes, so the Chinese government is afraid of the truth about what I have to say about China, about the suffering of the Uyghurs and others. That's why it's afraid of me and trying to blame me for the problems inside of China. In the case of Tibet, His Holiness Dalai Lama was able to flee Tibet, then raise the issue of the Tibetans in front of them. But our people were not able to flee, so the Chinese government controlled the area so tightly, we were not able to let the world know what happened to us. But since I came out, I began to speak about the plight of the Uyghur people and the persecution. Then the Chinese government began to be really afraid of the truth I'm speaking.
Why is there no more world attention on the Uyghur people as compared to the Tibetan people? Does this have anything to do with the idea that there could be Islamic terrorist elements within the separatist movement, or is it because of something else?
Burada xalqarалық jamiyat nima uchun Uyg'ur masalasiga Tibet masalasida qaramaydi? Balkim shu Uyg'urlar musulmon bo'lganki bir terroristlar, bir elementlar borning orasida deb shuna qaraganlar uchunmi?
Xalqaro jamiyat unda Xitoyning tashviqotiga ishlayotganlarmi bor deydi.
Obviously, there are some governments, maybe government officials that buy Chinese government's propaganda that there are Uyghurs are terrorists.
Çünki Xitoy hukumati mush dunyo terrorizm harakatidan keyin Uyg'ur xalqining ustidan 50 yildan beri ijro qilinmagan 10 siyosatni ijro qilib oldi.
And after 9/11, the Chinese government claimed itself a victim of so-called Uyghur terrorism and began to implement a number of highly provocative and intensive persecution measures.
Endi shu xalqaro jamiyat birisi Xitoy hukumatining tashviqotiga ishongan bo'lsa, yana birisi biz o'zimizning ahvolimizni anglitishda kechikdik.
On the one hand, the Chinese government has been able to some extent, deceive the international community on the nature of the Uyghur resistance to the Chinese rule. On the other hand, also the Uyghurs came out to the West very, very late to tell the story of their persecution. So that's why there is probably some misperception and misunderstanding of the situation of Uyghurs.
Bulupmu garip dünyasında anlatıştan keçikdik.
and we were late in the West to raise our case.
Şunun için meningçe bizning maslimizga hozir G'arb dunyosi, Amerika Tibet masalasiga qaragandek bağansiri yaxshi ishiga kirib bilib, hozir Xitoyning terrorist bu degan gaplarininki nihoyatda jiq yolg'on ekanligini tunib ketdi.
But still, in spite of the Chinese efforts to demonize the Uyghurs and label us as terrorists in the before the international community, but we receive strong support from the U.S. and other Western governments, and they do not believe the Chinese government propaganda that Uyghurs are terrorists. They believe there is genuine legitimate issues here at stake.
Endi mındaq bir məsələ, Xitay hökuməti Uyğurların bu zoravallıq yüzlənişini, bulub bu dini radikallıq yüzlənişini intay arzu qılıdı.
One thing that's important to point out is, in fact, the Chinese government wants Uyghurs to become so-called radicals and use violence against Chinese state to demonize the entire Uyghur people.
100 adam çıxıb bəsmi, 10 adam çıxıb bəsmi, o bizni qırış üçün rəsmi buludu onunla.
And if some Uyghurs are radicalized and use violence against Chinese state, that became a very good excuse for the Chinese government to justify the heavy-handed repression of the Uyghurs.
Meni qarşı çıxışı, meningdən qorxuşdaki səbəbim ana şu, mən aşınınğa qarşı.
Another reason Chinese government is afraid of me is because I'm against terrorism and violence.
Şununğa bizning Uyghur xalqini Xitoy hökuməti nima üçün to'xtamay o'ltirib, zoravallıqni shundaq chekirdan oshirib, Hitler Germaniya qandaq qirgan bo'lsa, shundaq hozir shundaq muomalani Uyg'urga qiryapti deganda, Uyg'urni faqat zoravallik girdoviga ishtirish maqsadi dunyoning oldida mushu da'voyimizni yo'q qilish.
Yeah. And the Chinese government's policies are extremely repressive and hardline towards Uyghurs. The Chinese government wants a number of radicalized Uyghurs to come up to use violence against Chinese state, then use that as a perfect justification and in front of the international community to state that China has a terrorist threat, it's fighting against terrorists, then to once for all just wipe out the Uyghur people's legitimate resistance and demands.
Çünki Uyg'urlar nima radikal emas, menga o'xshashli musulmon, biz o'zimizning urf odatimiz bilan islom diniga kirgan bo'lg'achqa biz unda qopangan, Xitoylar dunyoga tashviq qilayotgandek emas. Bizning mushundaq bo'lishimiz bu Xitoy hukumatining ichini pishiryotadi hozir deydi.
And also the Uyghurs are very moderate pro-Western Muslims. Uyghurs are not like radicals or terrorists often portrayed by the Chinese government. And that irritates the Chinese government. Chinese government always portrays Uyghurs as like hardcore terrorists, just like in the Middle East. But the government does not see that. So the Chinese government wants to create that among the Uyghurs.
Endi faqat bizning adamlarimiz qurolliqmışlar qarshi chiqmadi delememiz. 1% adam ya uning ukisini o'ltirgan, ya akisini o'ltirgan, ya o'zini turmuga tashlagan, qiynagan adamlar mush qo'shni davlatlarga qechib chiqib bular ashunaq ahvollar yuz bergan bo'lishi mumkin. U lekin Uyghur xalqining 1%-igimi tankanmaydi. U vakil bo'lolmaydi.
Obviously, I can't say Uyghurs, some Uyghurs did not use violence or some things like that. Some apparently did use violence, and if you trace back the problem, maybe some of them they were locked up for no reason. A lot of injustice, or parents were killed by the government for a number of reasons. Some people did use violence against the Chinese state, but those few Uyghurs are very small numbers, and they never represent the Uyghur people. But Chinese government always use that as an excuse to demonize the Uyghurs and attack the Uyghurs.
Do you think the United States should be doing more to help the Uyghur people's cause? And why aren't they doing more? But on the other hand, why should they be doing more?
Sizningcha Amerika hukumati hamda Uyg'urlar masalasiga kelgancha teg'imi bir tirishchanlik ko'rsatib chiqib qilish kerakmi? Hozir nimda ortiqroq ish qilib bermaydi, hamda nimda qilish kerak dedi.
Amerika hökuməti Uyğur məsələsinin muşu Cungo'nun hazırki dünyaya zoravallıq qilib, muş diktator bo'lib ketishiga sababchi bo'layotgan shuning ichida nihoyat muhim ish ekanligini tunib yetolmayotdi texi.
And one of the reasons probably is because the U.S. has still not realized the importance of the Uyghur issue up to this moment. But the realization is coming.
Uningdagi Uyg'ur masalasi O'rta Osiyo masalasida intayin muhim bir rol o'ynaydiganligi ham mush O'rta Sharq, O'rta Osiyo Amerikaning strategik planida mush tinchlikni o'rnatish, demokratiyani o'rnatishda eng muhim rol o'ynaydiganligini tunib yetib o'zining siyosatiga kirgizsa, cho'qim bizning masalamizni aytib muhim bir masala deydi.
Yeah, the Uyghur issue is not just a very small, like a minority issue, as many people say. It is a very high importance for the U.S. and other countries concerned because it is a human rights issue, and it's also a regional issue because East Turkestan is so strategically important. It's a buffer zone for China, lots of natural resources. It's China's gateway to South Asia, Central Asia, and Eurasia. So the location is also very important. For the U.S. government to succeed in Central Asia, especially in Afghanistan and Pakistan area, the Uyghurs serve a very big positive role. So when U.S. realizes this, U.S. probably will pay more attention to the Uyghur issue.
Lekin endi hozir Tibet meselesiga qaragan ekan, Birma deymiz, Tibet deymiz, Tayvan deymiz. Bizning meselemiz şunun bilan o'xshash. Amerika albatta bizning meselemizni o'zining qo'liga ashundaq elish kerak. Hozir bir qism oldi. Burunqidek emas, hozir nayt yaxshi burunqidan netcesi mayli State Department bo'lsin, Kongress bo'lsin, senator bo'lsin, mayli kishilik huquq tashkilotlari bo'lsin, qo'liga ilib burunqidan netcha hassa Uyg'ur meselesiga qarab atadi. Men ishini buningdan Amerika cho'qim buni tunib yetib bizning meselemizni qo'liga oladi deb.
The U.S. foreign policy is, of course, very concerned with democracy promotion and human rights issues, whether the protection of, promotion of human rights in Burma, or promotion of human rights of the Tibetans, all that. The Uyghur issue is very much like that. So we believe the U.S. Will pay more attention, but still, at the moment, the U.S. is very concerned, and they frequently express their human rights concerns with Chinese officials during bilateral dialogues, in their meetings, and we are very grateful for what they are doing now, and we hope, obviously, they do more.
But what comes of that, and what can come of that? Because there's been a lot of criticism of the U.S. government in terms of human rights issues that are brought up with China at various times, but the U.S. also has other strategic interests in China.
Shunday hamda Amerika namli Xitoy bilan shu kishilik huquq dialogi bu narsalarda hamda Amerika bilan Xitoy bilan boshqa bir strategiyalik manfaatlar bo'lganligi uchun kishilik huquq masalasi sal ojizroq deb tanqidlar bor edi. Shuna bundan qanday qaraysiz deb Uyg'urlar qanday bo'ldi?
Albatta ashning bizga ziyni bo'ldi. Yalnız bizga emas, mayli Tibet bo'lsin, mayli boshqalar bo'lsin, xali ziyni bo'ldi deydi.
Yes, of course, U.S. got criticized a lot for human rights, for not pushing too hard enough on China human rights issues because of other strategic concerns. But we hope U.S. will push more.
And President Bush'ның vaqtida bizning masalamizda Aqsaroyga akirgan yomon jiddiy qo'lga olgan deydi.
When Bush was the president, he pushed aggressively on human rights and other freedom agendas, obviously, and also welcomed Ms. Kadeer to the White House. But that has not happened, but we hope that will.
And President Obama chiqqan vaqtga ulgurib, bu dunyoning iqtisodiy masalasi bir ma'lumotdan bo'lgan bir davr bo'lib qoldi deydi.
I believe one of the reasons is because when Obama became the president, the economic downturn, all this came up, so it was harder for U.S. to push more aggressively on human rights issues globally.
Xitoy hukumatining mushu fursatdan foydalanib, endi bu Amerikaning mushunda qiliqi jiddiy bir paytga kirib ketib, kishilik huquq masalasi orqali surilib qolg'ashqa, mush fursatdan foydalanib Uyg'ur xalqini keng ko'lamda bostirib o'tadi deydi.
And so, because of the economic situation, human rights, in a way, in U.S.-China bilateral relations became on the sidelines. But China used that as a golden opportunity to further repress the Uyghurs.
Lekin men ishimni Amerikaning bu o'zining qimmat ko'z qarashi ham Amerikaningki davlatiningki asos maqsadi shu. Kishilik huquq, dunyoga demokratiya o'rnatish, dunyoning ishidagi tengsizlikni tuzash. Men ishimni Uyg'ur masalasi cho'qim qo'lga ilinadi, qilib qolmaydi, Amerika buning igi chiqadi deb ishimni.
And I'm confident that promoting human rights and democracy are two important parts of U.S. foreign policy. And the Uyghur issue will be prominently featured in the foreign policy in the future.
I just have one last question. You've done a lot of work on behalf of mothers, and you yourself are a mother. I believe your sons are still in prison, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Do you think of yourself as a feminist as well?
Shunayda siz ham o'zingiz bir analaylik tashkilotda qurgan deydi, baldırınızın türmüdə deydi. Şu an siz özünüzün bir ayal huquqçısı deb qaramsız deydi. Ayal huquqçısı degan ayallarlıq erlər bilan barabar erlərdən üstün turdu degandek bəzi şeylər qandaq to'maymiz deydigandek. Qanday qaraysiz? did.
Ben bir addi bir ona dep qarayman özümni hem muşu dünyadaki tengsizlik üstüde kuraş kısamken dep qarayman deydiler.
And I see myself as a simple mother, but not just a simple mother, of course, but the mother who wants to fight injustice in the world.
Endi ayollar hukuku meselesiga kelganda buna aytdi, ahamiyat berip muşu haqdimi ayollarning öz taqdirini, özünün hukukunu, balalarının hukuku haqqida, ayollarning tik turishi haqqidami bir alayda kurash ep barma deydi.
I'm also passionate on the rights of women and children as well. I believe they should have equal standing and they should have better lives.
Lekin balalarım üçün yig'layman men deydi.
And of course, I cry for my own children and their for
Men
their
bir
suffering.
onılıqdan, özümün onılıq muhabbetimden ayrılıp çıkıp demeyme deydi.
I cannot become something other than a mother.
Meningki muşundaq kurashning ichi kirketke vaqtimda, xalqimning tatvatqa azap oqibatlarini o'ylagan vaqtimda, ashundaq onalarning jig'izarısini ko'rgan vaqtimda o'zimni unutma deydi.
Sometimes I forget myself when I see the suffering of Uyghur women, the cries of the mothers for their children.
Ballarını analarning oldida 5dan 4dan ballarini atqa vaqtida men ashuni ko'zim bilan ko'rgan deydi.
Yeah, I was able to witness many times the execution of young males by the Chinese government in front of their mothers. So,
Shuning uchun shundaq vaqtda o'zimni unutib, buni kirman deydi. Lekin ash ballarimni o'ylagan vaqtida yana o'tirib, ash ballarim uchun ash har bir ma'lumotdan shundaq bo'lib ketaman, yig'layman, yana ichim ochiq bo'ladi, o'ylayman, men uningdan ayrilib ketamayman deydi.
so I'm still a mother. I care about my children deeply whenever I think about them. I cannot separate myself from the politics I'm doing than from being a mother. I'm both in a way.
Mesela men balamni ash vatandagi ballarim oyda bir qitim yo'qlaydi. Ash oyni balladan burun men kun sanab shu balamni ko'radigan kunni telefon berib ko'rdingmi deb so'rab bo'laman, shu kunni uqib bo'laman deydi.
Yes, I know the day that sometimes my family members are allowed to visit my imprisoned sons. So it's like I feel like as if I'm going to see them here. So I always call on the day of my family members whether they visited my sons in prison or not.
Lekin o kunni ko'rishmadik desa, shundaq ko'nglim yerim bo'ldi, atis qilma deydi.
And if for whatever reason the authorities did not allow them to visit, then I get really, down here. I call again the next day to see if they were able
Hazır
to
3
see.
yerim ay bo'ldi ko'rishdimi gili deydi.
And for the past 3.5 months, they were not allowed to visit my sons.
Aşındaq endişti men davamlıq görüşəldinizmi deymen, cügür deymen, turmuğu ba deymen, men yana şu onalığımdan, şu muşunu qilish jarayonida ayrılıp ketemeymen deydi.
And I'm always anxious to find out what happened. So I'm a mother and care about my own children as any mother does.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.